Hello, guys, and welcome to our second lesson. The first person is Henry Clay, and he was Secretary of State. And his main contribution, or what he's known for the most, is his contributions to domestic policy. Remember, domestic means at home. So we're talking about things like relations among the people who live in the United States, the states, what sort of policies we could have, trade agreements, all sorts of things. It's the opposite of foreign policy, which obviously deals with other countries. So domestic policy is exclusive to what happens within the United States. Now, Henry Clay also had an idea called the American System, and it was a financial plan, and it had a couple of aspects to it. The first thing was protective tariffs. Now remember, a tariff is a tax on an imported good. It's been in the news a lot lately, mainly because there's been a showdown with China about each side, both the United States and China, adding tariffs on the goods that we export. And what this does is it raises the price of a product that is produced in another country. And the idea is to persuade people that they're better off buying, in this case, an American-made product because it supports the United States and it will be less expensive. Other things, national bank, investment in infrastructure, so roads, bridges, ports, things of that nature. This guy is John C. Calhoun, and it is a very frightening picture. He was a vice president, and he was from South Carolina, and he did play a large role in the start of the Civil War, even though he didn't actually participate in the physical Civil War. We'll learn a little bit later about the nullification crisis. It came to a point where, the story goes anyways, that Andrew Jackson, president, threatened to come down to South Carolina and actually hang John C. Calhoun if he didn't take back the things that he had said. The Missouri Compromise, the effort to preserve the balance of power between slave and free states. And so what was happening here is that Missouri wanted to become a state, and they wanted to be a slave state. But if that happened, then you'd have one more slave state, and that because you had an advantage of one state over the other states, any sort of law or any sort of vote would always go in favor of slave states. So there was some way that was needed to come up with in order to make it even. And the idea to keep the same amount of slave and free states together was Missouri becomes a slave state, and then Maine, which is actually carved out of Massachusetts, becomes a free state. Now, obviously, the Civil War still happens, so how successful this was, is open to debate. We can say that the Civil War didn't happen until 1850, so at least 30 years later. So it did work for some time, but it was more of a thing of just kicking the can down the road. Here's Andrew Jackson, who's known for many, many things. The Battle of New Orleans, he was a big part of that. He was the 7th president. But he's also probably the most infamous for coming up with the Trail of Tears. And in fact, he also completely ignored the Supreme Court decision, Inter versus Georgia, which said that the Cherokee Nation is a independent, it's their own country. They have any power that another country would have, and you just can't walk into their land and take anything you want. And Andrew Jackson was famous for saying, the Supreme Court has made its decision, now let's see them enforce it, or something of that nature. And this is so horrible because Andrew Jackson obviously understood that it's not the Supreme Court's job to enforce laws. It's the Supreme Court's job to interpret laws. And in fact, it's actually the president's job to enforce the law as head of the executive branch. So this was a horrible embarrassment, but apparently people didn't really seem to care too much about the fate of the Cherokee or really any other Native Americans. There's another term, Jacksonian democracy, and again puts faith in the common man, the common people, similar to what Thomas Jefferson was advocating. So sort of a populist, sort of reach out to the average person type of thing. Trail of Tears, I'm sure you've heard of this before. It was just horrible. People who had lived in the area for generations and generations were forced to move to these foreign lands under brutal conditions. People starving and dying on the way, being ripped out of your homeland. It's just absolutely horrible, and there is no excuse for this. It's an embarrassment to the United States, and hopefully we learn not to, tear apart families and traditions and, just take things from people. They didn't do anything, so it's really, really a very sad, sad situation. And that will conclude our show for today. Thank you for watching.